Good morning. He knows the right answer. I hope that everyone's been having a great time at the meeting. Can I get a yes or a no or a maybe so? Okay, awesome, awesome, awesome. If not, let me know, but appreciate your letting me know the good things too and being sure to send out the word to others. Once again, I'm Dr. Linnie Golightly, and I am the president of the society and very honored to meet you all again this morning. It is my extreme pleasure to introduce to you today our commemorative speaker, Dr. John Humphrey Amuasi. He's based at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, where he is head of the Global Health Department of the School of Public Health and leader of the Global One Research Group at the Amuasi Center for Collaborative Research in Tropical Medicine. Dr. Amuasi is also a W2 professor of Global Health 1 at the Bernhard Nocht Institute of Tropical Medicine and the University of Eppendorf in Hamburg, Germany, an adjunct professor of the University of Minnesota School of Public Health here in the United States, and an honorary visiting research fellow in tropical medicine at the University of Oxford in the UK. Dr. Amuasi trained as a physician in Ghana and later graduated from the University of Minnesota School of Public Health here in the United States with postgraduate degrees terminating in a PhD in health research and policy. He set up and was the inaugural head of the Research and Development Unit at the 1,200-bed Kwame Anokye Teaching Hospital, I am sure I bungled the name, please forgive me, in Kumasi. For over 20 years, he is engaged in tropical medicine and global health research in low and middle income countries, including in malaria, NTDs, AMR, and One Health. He has also consulted for several global health-focused organizations and supported civil society organizations with technical expertise in matters related to access to drugs, vaccines, and diagnostics, as well as strategic advice related to global health research priorities. Dr. Amuasi's current research involves clinical and field epidemiologic studies on malaria, emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases, AMR, snakebite, and other neglected tropical diseases. He further serves as co-chair of the Lancet One Health Commission, an adjunct to a number of academic institutions, and as a regular technical advisor and contributor to the WHO, Africa CDC, African Academy of Sciences, and several other global health organizations. He is a board member of the Soulsby Foundation in the UK, an advisory board member of the British Medical Journal, and he happens to be a member of our own board of directors here at the ASTMH, which, as you know, is an elected position. I do have to add in just a few personal notes, because I actually usually call him John. He's passionate about mentorship. He has worked so hard in our organization to further the careers of others. He's a voice of reason, a voice of thought, someone who's always listening to others. And so I have to admit, it wasn't a great surprise when I discovered that our keynote speaker, Dr. Wasuma, he calls Mom. They're all in the family. He's a member of our family. And if you're new here, that means he's a member of yours as well. And so with that, I would like to invite him to the stage. As many of you know, we had another speaker who unfortunately could not be with us here, and he has stepped in, and I'm sure that with all those accolades that we've given, you're going to hear a wonderful, wonderful commemorative talk. John.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Linnie, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone for making it this morning to this lecture. I hope we'll have some fun. I'm going to be speaking on a topic that I love, which is about One Health, and I chose to title this One Health: Shifting the Goalposts in a Fast-Changing World. I'll just give you a bit of background to myself and the kinds of things that I dabble in. So you'll see me at the top right, or that'll be your top left, really. That was during the Marburg virus outbreak in Ghana, and we're trying to conduct an interview with the brother of the deceased, and this was right in the heart of where the outbreak had taken place. So I like to be on the ground, and this is me appearing to be busy in the lab. Obviously, I don't spend time in the lab, but the work that we do involves lab work. And then this is me busy at my desk trying to crunch numbers or make sense of stuff on the wide screen. And that's me enjoying some time with the late Kofi Annan. So I try to dabble in a few things here and there, and it's really exciting, this world of global health. But I'd like to start with this quote from Warren Buffett. And he said, "There's enormous resistance to change, while a similar acknowledgement that change will be needed." And this is why I titled my talk, One Health, Shifting the Goalpost in a Fast-Changing World. Now, I'd like you to watch this short video. Those of you who come from the more northern states of the U.S., like Minnesota and others, would appreciate it a lot. If you're from Canada, you'd be totally excited about it. So here goes.
When they're down across the line, they storm the crease like bumblebees. They travel like a burning flame. We see them slide the puck inside. It's a 1-1 hockey game. Oh, the good old hockey game is the best game you can name. And the best game you can name is the good old hockey game. Across the line, they storm the crease like bumblebees. They travel like a burning flame. We see them slide the puck inside. It's a 1-1 hockey game. Oh, the good old hockey game is the best game you can name. And the best game you can name is the good old hockey game.
Well, I believe that you would find that really interesting. I don't know how that little kid could manage on the skates. I still can't manage on the skates to date, let alone play hockey. Well, that's a classic example of shifting the goalposts. Who cares? He scored, right? All right, so this is how I've outlined my talk. I'll talk about shifting the goalposts. I'll speak to the complexity of One Health, global health and One Health, and I'll explain why shifting the goalposts is actually essential, because shifting the goalposts automatically sounds negative, right? And I'll conclude with why we need to follow the science, and following the science sometimes means shifting the goalposts, if I'll put it that way. So shifting the goalposts, I mean, this is looked upon negatively in general, and it speaks to a moving target of some sort. So you're changing previously set standards for something after those standards have already been met. So it's saying things have changed. You're not able to meet the mark, or you're changing what you had set before. But while shifting the goalpost is considered negative, in some other senses, it may not be so negative, and we may need to consider it. And I'll just go through a couple of slides on different kinds of shifting the goalposts. That's what I call the shameless shifting of the goalposts. And you can see on that cartoon some arguments, this time about flat earthers, and people still believe that the earth is flat for some reason, right? And they'll deny any proof that the earth is not flat, but that's just the world as it is. And so this could be what you call a classic example of moving the goalposts, the fallacy of moving the goalposts. This is just utterly shameless, if I'll put it that way. There's also the fallacious shifting of the goalpost, and you see in this example, someone arguing that, okay, there's no product that easily kills fleas on cats. And then someone, comes in and says, well, there is one product, and then the person says, no, it doesn't kill fleas on both cats and dogs. So they're shifting the goalposts. So that's what we call fallacious goalpost shifting. But in the same instance, the goalpost may be shifted with good reason, because if the product kills the fleas on the cats and the cat as well, then we've got a problem, and it's worth not accepting that product. So that would be a non-fallacious goalpost shifting, right? Okay. Let's go to science, a bit of science. And we know from the days of Hippocrates, known as the father of medicine, that knowledge evolves. And he put forth the humoral theory, which was adopted and looked upon very favorably. Black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. Many of you may be familiar with this in your early science lectures or medical school lectures. And everybody went with it. This was Hippocrates. But of course, we know there's nothing like black bile, yellow bile, and so on. This was tossed into the garbage when germ theory came about. So as the knowledge evolved, they had to shift things around, right? But we love static knowledge. And this is good because in science we like to say we've established the facts. We establish the facts and we stick to them rigorously and unwaveringly. But this, in one way or the other, leads us to have some problems because we can end up shifting the goalposts to suit our knowledge or failing to shift the goalposts also to suit our knowledge. And how does this happen sometimes? I'll give you a few examples drawing from history. So many of you have heard of Semmelweis, who was an Austrian scientist who put forward that hand washing was very good and really important and necessary. He did some work looking at the impact of maternal mortality, impact of hand washing on maternal mortality. And he argued that doctors were moving straight from the morgue to the delivery room. And in those days, there was nothing like gloves, so people cared less for gloves. In fact, the less of those protective or PPE you used, the more of a proper doctor or caring doctor you were because you're willing to engage with the patient. So doctors were just, moving from the morgue, touching dead bodies and going straight into the delivery room and delivering women. Can you imagine that? Well, it happened. Semmelweis proposed from his work that, look, if you just wash your hands, you can reduce maternal mortality from about 18% to 2%. Guess what happened? His friends were angry with him, totally rejected him. He was ostracized. He actually developed mental health issues. He was committed to an asylum by his own friends, and he got beaten up in the asylum and he died 14 days later. It was years later that it was found by Pauling, Louis Pasteur, and actually Pauling and others. They put forward a theory, the germ theory, which supported Semmelweis' findings. So Semmelweis was rejected because he had no theory to back what he had found. They were unwilling to shift, and he paid a high price for it. Only after he was gone was it realized that he actually was not very far from the truth. So let's come to the rigor of clinical trials. In clinical trials, we believe that we've got to be really, really rigid. Any change would call for an amendment that needs to go to the FDA, needs to go to your ethics committees, and it can be very costly and time-consuming. And many of you can identify with me situations where you just want to change one little thing in your clinical trial protocol, and it means going through the whole process all over again, painfully taking weeks upon weeks. And sometimes you have to pay again for the review process, although it's just maybe one word you were changing or a change in a dosage or something. Well, this is what it is. And even if you deviate even a little bit for one good reason or the other, it must be documented as a deviation. You need to file a CAPA or note to file or whatever. That's just the way we do things. However, now we've moved into adaptive platform trials, clinical trials. This doesn't mean you can do whatever you want, but it recognizes the need for change and shifting as your knowledge improves while running the trials. Now we can even drop arms in clinical trials and replace them as we move along, changing even the power as we move along. And this took a long time, but we are here now, recognizing even in clinical trials the need for shifts based on incremental knowledge. And this just is a schematic showing how platform trials work. And increasingly, platform trials are becoming the go-to design, especially in pandemic research when there are trials for drugs and trials for vaccines, simply because we do not know what works. And when we get to know what works, we go with it. when we get to know what doesn't work, we drop it and replace it with something else. It can be frustrating sometimes. I remember during the COVID pandemic, we were running the anti-cough trial, which was sponsored by D&DI. And by the time we were ready to go with the trial in Ghana, we had already found that chloroquine wasn't working. So we actually ended up with an armless trial just when we were ready to start. And so until we got some arms, we couldn't really start recruiting any patients. But that's just the way it is. Platform trials just show us now the willingness to shift as knowledge increases. So are we really ready to shift the goalpost? Very interestingly, Bradford Hill, Sir Austin Bradford Hill, who put forward the Bradford Hill criteria, which we use as the basis for establishing causality, especially in epi, he said something which I really appreciate and I love quoting to my students. He said, none of my 9 viewpoints, he put forward these 9 viewpoints, although we call them the Bradford Hill criteria, right? He said, can bring indisputable evidence for or against the cause and effect hypothesis, and none can be required as a sine qua non. It seems as if Bradford Hill, Sir Austin Bradford Hill, had some premonition that perhaps as knowledge increases, his theory or his views as well might go in the garbage, or suffer the same fate as Hippocrates and the germ theory and so on. At least he realized that as knowledge abounds, we would change our way of looking at things, shifting the goalpost. So I want to speak to the complexity of global health and One Health in particular, and why in this space, in this fast-changing world, we need to have this ability to shift or to move as knowledge increases. And we need to do this a bit faster than we're doing currently, otherwise we'll be stuck in our ways and we won't have the optimal outcomes that we could have if we were just a bit quicker in our shifting. So why is One Health so important these days? And this just shows, I took this from a good piece called the seminal piece by Frank and Moon, and they just situated or tried to map out global health policy arenas, and you just see the complexity of global health there, the key actors and the various roles that are played. It is very, very complicated. And there are current global health issues that really make this even more complicated. Infectious diseases, non-communicable diseases, talk about even the interactions between communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases. We are recognizing that they are very interesting and important interactions between the two, which work very differently in different parts of the world, even as a function of socioeconomic status and other variables. Food safety and food security issues are always at the top. Climate change is a major issue, injuries, and One Health. One Health is increasingly becoming a major global health issue. And why do I say so? Today will mark the end, and I don't know the outcome yet, hopefully it is the end, of the negotiations of the pandemic treaty in Geneva. So they should be finishing in a couple of hours, all things being equal. And Article 5 in the current version of the pandemic treaty does invoke One Health, the whole article on One Health. Of course, I hear in the grapevine that there may be some changes going on there, but I can't speak to that for sure. I'm sure we'll know in a bit. But One Health, at least at the last version, had a whole article dedicated to it. And this should tell you the cardinal role that One Health plays in global health, and the need for us to understand One Health and its complexity and why it will require agility and the ability to shift as our knowledge improves and as we better appreciate the complexity of the interactions that go on in One Health. I've put here the definition of One Health, or shall I say the description of One Health put forward by the One Health high-level expert panel. I will not read it in full, but when you see a definition or description of this length, what this tells you is that this was a lot of pain in coming to these words, and every little word counts, and that it's a very complicated matter. And also that there may be many unhappy others who just accepted it because they were either tired or just said, we'll take it as it is. So that alone speaks to its complexity. This is also the schematic or the illustration of One Health put forward by OLEP. we've moved away from the three, from the Venn diagram kind of definition of One Health, where you have these intersecting circles of animal health, environmental health, and human health, and One Health in the middle. It's much more than just One Health in the middle or intersecting, of these three. And this alone tells you the complexity of One Health. And actually what it does is reveal how little we actually know about these interactions. But it also shows that there will be constant changes and shiftings in the way these parts interact with each other. In fact, the greater the complexity, the more we need to be ready to shift the goalpost. And these are just a few descriptions I've put here about health systems and One Health systems, and just generally helping us to appreciate how complexity requires the ability to shift, because the different parts will interact with each other in different ways at different times. One shift in one small place can lead to big shifts in another place. And so it's constantly moving, constantly interacting, and we've got to be following and shifting and moving, so the goalpost, so to speak, as we move along. Otherwise, we'll be stuck in our ways, and we'll end up doing things that might even be injurious, if perhaps not helpful at all. We want to move away from this input, black box, output kind of paradigm. But it's difficult in One Health because you have to unpack all the parts and examine how they interact with each other. In classic health systems theory, you would hear about these feedback loops and how they interact with each other, positive, negative feedback. And it's not the same positive feedback all the time. It's not the same negative feedback all the time. In fact, what may be a positive feedback in one jurisdiction may be a negative feedback in another jurisdiction. It's almost always never a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. So how do we go about unpacking this? I'll give you just one example of the inherent complexity of these systems, and many of you may be familiar with this. This is a schematic showing a real-world health system's effectiveness of artemisinin-based combination therapies. And I love using this slide in my teaching because it just shows how, while you may have something beautiful in the lab, 98% parasitemia clearance rate. This is the gold standard. We love it when we hear this. Any drug that doesn't give you this is considered not quite there. Okay, so you may think that you have a drug, 98% parasitemia clearance, malaria no more. Malaria delinda est. Many of us are familiar with that quote. But not so fast. We've got access issues. We've got diagnostic targeting issues. So do people have access to drugs in the first place? Well, they may have the access to drugs, but can they be tested? Can they be found as people who need to have the drug? Would the provider comply with the result of the test? We have the test, treat, and track. Would they follow that, or would they treat blindly because the patient has a fever, it's not malaria, they don't know what else to give, they're afraid the patient will not be happy with them, and so they give them something, an anti-malarial. I recall as a young doctor in a village, I went there after medical school. I wanted to have a good experience of the real thing. And I was told that when the old ladies come, make sure that whatever you do include an injection, intramuscular, of water for injection, at least. Because if you don't give them an injection, they'll say that doctor is not good. They won't come back to you've got to give them something strong. They've got to feel some pain. And then they know that, yeah, the doctor really did some work on me, you see. But that's the issue with provider compliance. At least water for injection won't kill anyone, hopefully. Maybe an abscess or two, but it's not too bad. All right. What about the patient adherence? So the doctor gave the patient the medicine. Did they actually take it? Did they take it in the right way? So ultimately, you'd realize that you may have a wonderful drug, your lab indices are great, but in reality, you're hardly seeing anything. And this is where the implementation research comes in. But you see the complexity in there. And these may work differently in different parts of the world for different kinds of drugs. This is why we need to continue in shifting as and when our knowledge increases. Shifting, we may even need to change the color of a tablet. That could be a game changer. But how would we know this unless we're looking and trying to understand? So this is why we need health systems thinking in global health, in One Health more specifically, even as we move into this new era of One Health, which has clearly been embraced by the quadripartite. And so I like to say that health system thinking is a deliberate, continuous, and comprehensive process which essentially involves shifting the goalposts. So why is shifting the goalposts essential specifically in One Health? Well, as I've already mentioned, dynamism is a property of One Health. Even the OLEP illustration suggests this, I mentioned. The goalpost moves naturally. It's like following a moving target, as you can see. It's here today, there tomorrow, and so on. And we must shift the goalpost ourselves as might be necessary based on evolution of knowledge. I mentioned this, so better research, better data, better analysis, better outcomes. That's it. And then there may be important variables which are changing, which may be shifting, and they may impact on the One Health approach and ultimately on outcomes. And this is outcomes not only for human health, but One Health outcomes. So it's outcomes for the shared environment, outcomes for the animals with whom we share the environment. And we're seeking also to modify our value systems. And why do I say this? Our value systems influence the way we interpret even the data. What do we see as a positive outcome, or the degree of a positive outcome? It's also a function of our value systems. And of course, we can't all have the same value systems, but some degree of agreement is necessary in our value systems to be able to establish some of these metrics and shift when we need to. So I'm going to go through some of these. The first one is the evolution of knowledge, the better data, better research, better data, better analysis. The question of the who, the what, the where, and the when, these are never static. Sometimes the what, is a bit easy to sort out. You may establish what the what is. But the where and the when, these can change very, very rapidly. So the who, well, it's people in different parts of the world. This is pretty easy to determine who you're dealing with. What populations are you dealing with? However, these populations can change pretty rapidly on account of, say, conflict. Population dynamics can change very rapidly on account of conflict. But climate change also will impact on population, migration will impact on population. The who may be a bit more static, but that also is amenable to change. The what? Well, the stuff happening all the time. Think about the floods in Europe over the past couple of weeks, particularly in Spain, unbelievable sights in Valencia. The fires that we had here in the US last year, and a couple this year as well, but not as bad as last year. The pandemics that we have faced globally, the epidemics, the outbreaks, now Marburg in Rwanda. Talk about even dengue being found in African countries that hitherto did not have dengue, or thought they did not have dengue, let me put it that way. Or dengue even in the Mediterranean parts of Europe, in southern Spain and Italy. Dengue in the US, these are big issues, South America. So the where, the places, these places are what they are, but they can change very rapidly. And the when, climate change is always happening. It's changing the whole landscape. It's impacting on biodiversity, impacting on health in the broadest sense. So this is why I like to say it's a moving target. It's a constantly moving target. Where is it happening? What is the problem? Who is it affecting? When is it happening? What are the possible solutions? And so this is why we need the One Health systems thinking, and this is why we need to follow that moving target. I want to go on and also speak a little bit to important variables which are rapidly changing and can impact One Health approaches and outcomes. Here are a couple of them. I call them the One Health goalpost shifters. Climate change, we know this very well. It's happening faster and faster. And what happens is that while climate change may be slow, relatively slow, the impacts are sudden and immediate. So it can change an entire landscape within 24 hours. It can wipe out a species within a couple of hours, just on account of the crescendo or the ultimate outcome of climate change. Intense pollution and biodiversity loss is another goalpost shifter. Many of you may be following the illegal mining activities that have been going on in many parts of the world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, and the impact that this is having on water bodies. It is outstanding, to say the least, in the negative sense. Pristine water bodies are just being turned into murky waters overnight, literally, on account of intense pollution from illegal mining. And this is happening with people not even internal to the country, but externals to the country. And it's happening in broad daylight, and everyone seems to be turning a blind eye to it. So we may be complaining about climate change, but the intense pollution, which is pushing biodiversity loss, has huge implications for health. And I encourage you to read the IPBES report. I'm happy I was one of the co-authors on the IPBES report, which was looking at biodiversity loss and its impact on health. It's really stark. Of course, we know the emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. The world knows very well because we experienced it together. Everybody knows that this is real and the threat is there, and it's just a question of when the next one, not if. But we just got to be prepared for it. Pathogen variants and AMR are another, and I'll come a bit more to these. Infectious diseases, non-communicable diseases, I spoke about this before. Artificial intelligence is quickly changing the way we understand things. If for anything at all, perhaps AI would be the fastest goalpost shifter in our fast-changing world. And then the outcome of the pandemic treaty, again, would be a goalpost shifter because it would change the way we go about things. It may change the funding landscape. It may change the research priorities. It may change the way existing bodies interact with each other and share responsibilities and mandates. So these are just a few of what I call One Health goalpost shifters. I'll speak specifically to a few of these, even as I round up AMR, for example. We heard that AMR was really the big problem, and it's especially fueled by use of antibiotics in farming, where people use these either for plants and especially for animals, especially in animal husbandry, intense use of antibiotics so that the animals can grow quicker, grow bigger, and more money can be made. So it's an economic question. And the hypothesis has been that this drives antimicrobial resistance. While this hypothesis is valid in one sense, the knowledge that we are getting today is making us realize that it is not exactly what we thought it was. Not that it's not a problem, not that AMR is not a problem, but that the drivers of AMR, especially the use of antibiotics in farming, is not as huge a problem as we thought it was. And please hear me well, it is a problem, but it's not as huge as we thought it was. In fact, some of the resistant bacteria that we think emerged in recent time have actually been found by phylogenetic analysis to have existed even before we started using antibiotics. So this just tells you, as we advance in our knowledge, we will change the way we do things. Talk about the interactions between non-communicable diseases and communicable diseases. I've spoken to this already, but this is an area which has been, largely unexplored, especially as we get into, epidemics and pandemics and how these interact with people. We saw how the impact of COVID globally on people who had pre-existing conditions like diabetes and hypertension and COPD and other conditions. That's your classic example of interactions between non-communicable disease and infectious disease. But there are even more interesting molecular level interactions and genetic level interactions, which we are yet to understand. We've barely scratched the surface. And this can easily change the way we do health. Climate change, I've already spoken to, but the impact of climate change on health is vast. It's vast. From health systems and health facilities through to direct health outcomes, and I've spoken to some of these already. In fact, it's been shown that a 2 to 3 degree increase in global average temperatures will affect the migration pathways of mosquitoes. And you can imagine what that means for malaria, for dengue fever, for Zika, for filariasis, for you just name them. And this also means that it could have impact on how we go about our control programs for all these vectors which we are looking to eliminate, these diseases we are looking to eliminate, and some we're looking to eradicate. I just want to speak also to a bit of COVID and how the knowledge that we had on COVID changed as we moved along. We ended up with the Omicron variant. There were a couple of variants after that, but the Omicron was the last popular variant. After Omicron, everybody was like, okay, we've had enough. That's the end of it. But Omicron had a very fast spread rate, was more infectious, but thankfully it was less lethal. And some people have done the analysis and shown how the evolution of the virus, the changes in the variants, impacted significantly on deaths and various outcomes. And even our knowledge of how to treat the disease had to move along with the variants. We had to shift. Things that we thought were working, or which actually were working, we had to change because the virus had changed, or the ways in which we're administering those drugs, or the ways in which we're preparing the healthcare system had to change as our knowledge increased. In fact, there were several hypotheses, and this I took from a Nature Review article, several hypotheses on how the SARS-CoV-2 variants of concern could emerge. It could have been many things, either via person-to-person spread, and how that would change in between as a result of exchange of the virus between human beings and different populations across the world. It could also be the involvement of animals, the virus jumping to animals, and this is what many of us feared the most, it undergoing some mutations in animals and jumping back into humans as a super mutant, but it did not really happen this way. Why? We're still looking into that. But it could have been so many things. This is also a third hypothesis as well, that treatment could also have impacted on how this would have changed and the variants that would have been in circulation. So many, many hypotheses, and you'd realize that it required us following the virus very closely and shifting, moving things right from treatment through to control approaches based on the knowledge that we were getting. And finally, as I mentioned already, we are seeking to modify our value systems. This is perhaps the most difficult part. This is where the science communication, this is where the listening, this is where the understanding, this is when the innovative approaches to communication comes in. As I said before, there is the need for some degree of agreement in basic values. Basic values and agreement around the need for vaccination, for example. Basic values and agreement on the need for lockdowns when it does arise, and so on. But how do we achieve this? And it would require a lot of shifting and moving in the ways in which we not only conduct our science, but how we communicate our science. So ultimately, what we should do is to follow the science, and we need to keep on communicating to the population, the people that we serve, the need to follow the science. Otherwise, we will present to them something as though it is static, and then when there's a need to shift, we will have problems. So I like to say One Health inherently involves continuous improvement, learning from what goes wrong and what goes right, and then making changes. And this is not easy at all. It means if we want to follow the science, we'll need to carefully, boldly, and decisively, yet reflectively and respectfully move the goalposts. That's not easy. And we need to recognize that it's okay to move the goalposts when we are the ones who constructed it and installed it. The goalie's net should act more like a fishing trawler's net, not just as a fixed net. We go where the fish are, and when they move, we move. So, learning from what goes wrong and what goes right and making changes. Well, I'm saying that since the process of building and installing the goalposts is collective, then the process of dismantling and moving it should also be collective. And this is where sometimes we go wrong. We shift the goalpost and we don't explain why the goalpost is being shifted. It takes time, and sometimes we don't have that time, but we need to make time for it. Otherwise, we get a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance, and then there'll be factions, and then we have the problems, which would ultimately impact on poor health outcomes. So as I conclude, what are some of the things that we need to do? I've outlined 6 things we need to do. Because of time, I will not read them all out, but we need to operationalize, implement, and institutionalize adequate, innovative, transparent, sustainable financing mechanisms. And I'm excited about the pandemic treaty, and I'm just waiting for the outcomes, ultimately, of how we will finance those activities. Who is going to pick up the tab? Where's the money going to come from? Particularly for LMICs, who unfortunately suffer the most from the inequities which end up with negative outcomes for health when there are pandemics or outbreaks and these goalpost shifting events which I made mention of. And this is why we need to establish a system of training, what I call the One Health workforce. And we also need to move towards research independence. Why do I say research independence? Research independence in the sense that we want as much as possible the science to be as free as possible. Freedom to conduct the science that we love, the science that is needed, but also to remain connected to those who are able to make the decisions. It must be transparent, it must be visible, and the challenge is that sometimes they believe the science is intransparent, and this is where there is a lot of pushback and negative reaction. Unfortunately, we then also react negatively to the negative reactions, and then it becomes a vicious cycle of the them versus the us, and yet we're all the same. So we also need to pay significant attention to incorporating research into routine health systems activities, particularly routine health care. In LMICs in particular, this is a bit of a challenge. You've got the researchers and you've got the healthcare givers. And sometimes there's conflict, especially when there's outbreaks or pandemics, where they say it's not time for research, we have a problem on our hand, we need to treat people, not time for research. On the contrary, it is actually the more the time when we need the research. But how do we create what I've called this golden space where research and healthcare delivery meet? So this is why we need to institutionalize One Health as a part of routine surveillance, where surveillance doesn't become something detached from our everyday health systems activities. And of course, extensive collaboration amongst various departments in the WHO and global health, the global health community. We still need to follow the science. And many of you may be familiar with this cartoon. It was actually drawn in the negative, but this is what it is. The goalposts will be shifted because we're following the science, even though it can be uncomfortable, and it does come with risks. And in our Lancet One Health Commission, which I co-chair, for example, we had a lot of challenges getting economists to play ball with us. The reason was not because they didn't believe in some of the thoughts that we're putting forward about the need for a change in the way the global economic system is run, but for fear of being ostracized by their colleagues because they will be going against what the tenets of economics say. So there was a recognition there's a need to shift, but no one was ready to take flack for it, even though they agreed that, yeah, we need to change. But if they see my name on that paper, my folks will come after me, my family will come after me, right? So I just put this in there. It's from yesterday's Washington Post. This is, again, one of the reasons why we need to engage and interact. And now it must happen. Otherwise, we would have even more problems than we have come before. Why do we have people called vaccine skeptics? These are well-educated people who've been to some of the best schools in the world, so they are not dumb. But the question is, why would they arrive at these kinds of conclusions? Is it because they're inherently bad people? I really don't think so. But these are the questions we need to ask. Perhaps we've not done a good job of moving everyone along appropriately. And as I said, moving the goalposts can be very uncomfortable. And many of you are familiar with the AstraZeneca vaccine. I had 3 shots of that. I'm still standing. And how we slowly got to the position that it does pose a risk for blood clots. However, that risk is actually not different from the random risk of getting blood clots. However, it took some time to arrive at this. And unfortunately, AstraZeneca, and I say unfortunately, not because I'm a big fan of Big Pharma per se, but I think it is really unfortunate that they are getting sued because some people died on account of these blood clots.
At the time, that was the science we knew, and we had to go for it. Millions of lives were saved with the AstraZeneca vaccine, particularly in LMICs. Can you imagine the risk or what it means if there's this perception of risk of being sued, how long it would take for us to have these vaccines that were really needed at the time? So this shifting of the goalposts can be a bit daunting, but it needs to be done together. So I'd say solutions that move beyond business as usual require using the evidence from science to reassess the relationship between people and nature. And this would call for a shifting of the goalposts. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for indulging me. Thank you. I understand there's time for questions, or then no time for questions. I'm just looking for a sign. So that's it. All right, so once again, I'd like to say thank you very much. Thank you to ASTMH for having me. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
No time for questions from the audience to the podium, but please do feel free to come up and speak with Dr. Amuasi with any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.